During an amazing weekend exploring the mountains of Saudi Arabia in the Baha region, I managed to shoot this time-lapse of the Thee Ayn village, only to find out, after post-processing, that the whole video was ruined by this flashing light. Now, considering the amount of effort it took to capture the moment, I was determined to save this time-lapse from the recycle bin. So in this video, I'll take you through the steps I took to remove the offending light. So we finished the time-lapse, and after the post-processing you can see that there was this kind of physical light within the building, or one of the uplighters in the building, and the problem is that light was clearly had a problem, or it was broken in some way, so it was actually flashing the whole time. I don't think it was supposed to be flashing. It's definitely not for effect. So clearly a faulty light on the building pretty much ruined the whole time lapse. So I need to find a way or figure out a way of trying to fix that. So the way that I did it was in After Effects. So we open up After Effects. We have to load in all the files. So to do that, we right click in the project panel and we go to import multiple files. And then from there, you have to navigate to where those are saved. So these files have already been processed in Lightroom. They've been color corrected, color adjusted, and there's been some kind of flicker removal already. I cannot physically remove the flicker from that light. That's a physical light that wasn't working properly. That kind of malfunctioned, definitely ruined the time lapse. I need to find a way of fixing that. I cannot fix that in Lightroom. It's not something, or I cannot fix it with a flicker correction software like Flicker Free, for example. It's not going to work. So I need to find another way. So we import the files. So you can see here, all the files are laid out from the Canon R5. So these are 8K photo files, going to give you a nice 8K time-lapse movie or video. So click on the first image file, LR20001, okay, or however you have it named. Just click on the first image of that sequence. So you're importing a sequence file. So at the bottom, check create composition and also check import a JPEG sequence. And if you want, you can force alphabetical order. It's not going to matter for me because they're numbered anyway at the end, so they're going to load in sequence. So I'm now going to click on open. This import window opens up again, so you just need to cancel that. So what After Effects imports is, it's imported this sequence file, which is here, LRT, and it's telling you it's going from image 1 to image 537, so it's the entire sequence. So LRT3 is the composition that it's created. Okay, so After Effects has created a composition based on that sequence. So we can open up LRT3 here, and you can see that sequence file has been saved. So now we can scroll through, and then you can see that that is the entire sequence. So you can see that that light it's a physical light within the building, and it's just not working properly, and that's causing me a lot of problems. A lot of other problems here. I mean, I was in a bit of a rush to set it up because we were losing light. So you can see at the bottom, this is the car headlights. So I was using the car as a bit of a windbreaker for the tripod. That was kind of working really well because it was a little bit windy. We're up in the mountains. So that was working really well, but I forgot to turn the headlights off. So I kept them on because I didn't want it to affect the overall exposure. So I just left them on, but we need to crop that foreground part out, which we'll do later as well. So this whole time lapse was kind of riddled with problems I really want to try and fix, and luckily we have programs like After Effects are really useful for fixing time lapses and also other video production. So how do I do this? Okay, so we have our LRT3 composition, which is fantastic. We want to create another composition. So we're going to take LRT3 and we're going to drag it and create a new comp. So that's now LRT4. So let's change the name and just call it main comp. Okay, we're going to change the composition settings. I'm going to go from 8K down to sort of 4K, like so. Change the frame rate to, well, I prefer 25. Doesn't really matter. By default, I think it's been set to 30 frames, but I changed it to 25 frames a second. So we need to make it smaller because it's 8K on a 4K timeline. So let's knock it down to 65. And I think it looks pretty good. And you can see now that we've got that irritating flicker that's going on, which is what we need to get rid of. No software, no flicker-free software is going to work here. We need to do it manually in After Effects. So let's get to it. You want to duplicate LRT3, or whatever it's called, that layer. That sequence composition needs to be duplicated. So now we make a pre-comp, and let's call that LRT flicker comp. Okay, well, let's open that up. So in this composition, this is where we are going to physically try and remove this horrible light that's flashing. It's a flashing light, basically. It's not a flicker, it's a flashing light. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to go to LRT3. We're going to go to Enable Time Remapping. And we're going to change the time value here. We're just going to drag this down, and we're going to set it to about, I think, 3, maybe 4 seconds. Let's set it to 4 seconds. So we're going to select the toggle hold keyframe. Really important, because we don't want it to animate, and I'll show you why. So then next we just duplicate that and we drag it over, and we just leave a little bit of a space where we can do a quick kind of opacity transition here. So just like a fade. But now we need to change this value here so it corresponds to the timeline. So we're going to change that to, is it 3 seconds, I think? Okay, so toggle hold keyframe. So we're changing the time remapping, and that's a toggle hold keyframe. Now we're going to duplicate that again, and it gets a slight overlap. You want to change that to 6 seconds, so it corresponds to the timeline. And repeat the process again, move it over so that it's overlapping, and now it's on, time remap is on 9 seconds. And do it again, so that we are on 12 seconds, I guess. Yep, so move it up another 3 seconds to 12. And then repeat the process again. And we're kind of home and dry now, so it doesn't really matter. So 15, and time remap going up to 15. It's pretty much the end of our time lapse. So as you scroll through now, you can see that there's a sort of transition. Actually, on the first keyframe, I'm just going to nudge that forward, so it looks like there's a little bit of a jolt there, which we need to get rid of. That's better. Okay, so that's better. So at the beginning, and this is purely for my time lapse, the way that it's set up, I think there was a slight jolt of the tripod at the beginning, so I'm just going to nudge it forward just a fraction. So we've got rid of that little jolt, and now it looks like it's really nice and smooth. We're trying to remove this flicker, this light that's kind of flashing, and we're doing it by holding these keyframes for when that light was on and not off. So you can see now, as we're going through, you can see that the light is always on. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to set in the transform, I'm going to set the opacity, and we're just going to fade in here like this. Let's copy those keyframes, paste them over, and then again, you can see here I'm just going to paste in. So there's just a slight transition on each of these layers. And let's scroll through again. Yeah, so you can see now there's a slight transition, and that kind of works quite nicely. So now we're going to go back to the main comp, and you can see now that LRT flicker comp, because it's sitting over the top of the original layer, LRT3, so we're not going to see any of the sort of actual time lapse. It's almost like an image transition. We're using the time remapping to hold on certain keyframes, so it's not a real time lapse anymore. Okay, so what we need to do now is that we need to create a mask. We need to go back to the main comp. We need to select the LRT3 flicker comp, which is the one that we just created, and we now need to add a mask. So right click and add new mask. If you can't see it, then you need to go into view layer controls. Okay, so here's our mask. It's this little purple box that we've got here. Okay, so let's drag this in. Okay, so the idea is that we're going to be masking out part of the scene that we don't want. So we're only going to be selecting a mask around the area where that light was flickering, which is in this sort of top kind of left corner of the building or the village. So we need to add more points to this mask. There's not enough. So you need to go up here to the pen tool. You need to add vertex tools. I'm going to roughly add some points in here where I think I'm going to need them. So now what I can do, I can start to drag these points down around this building. It needs to be pretty accurate because we physically need to mask this building. It's not one of those things where you can do it fairly rough. I'm going to change the quality to full, so I really need to be able to see what I'm doing here. It needs to be pretty accurate around the building. You're going to have to obviously customize this tutorial in a way that works for you, but I'm just literally just showing you how this was done. The great thing about After Effects is you can always come back in and make these alterations if you need to. And so it's going to go around this building. It needs to be pretty accurate. I mean, let's see how we get on here. Okay, so we've set our mask up and it looks something like this. Gone around the rough outline of where I think that kind of light flicker was happening. So we're going to leave it there. You can always come back to it and make changes. The great thing about After Effects is it's a very, very flexible program to use. And so now we're going to check the mask on here. Let's turn off the bottom layer so we can actually see what the mask is doing. So you can see here that the mask is literally cutting out a section of our flicker comp. So this is the composition where we set up that kind of flicker correction. We'll call it the flicker correction, doesn't really matter. So now I'm going to turn the bottom layer back on and turn off that top layer. So it needs to be pretty accurate, okay? So we've got to get the mask in order. If the mask isn't right, then it's not going to work. And that's quite off actually, so let's move that back in. Yeah, but like I said, After Effects, really, really good. You can always make these changes very, very easily. Graphics card isn't keeping up with this. Okay, let's leave it there. Okay, so we can see our time lapse underneath now, which is the LRT3 layer. We can also see what the LRT3 flicker comp is doing over the top of it. Let's just give it a second, let's just run this through. Okay, so we play this back in the timeline. As you can see, it doesn't look particularly good. There's a bit of a mismatch on the time of the video, time of the time lapse. You can also still see there's quite a lot of flicker going on. So we need to do two things. We need to alter the toggle keyframe. So that's the keyframes where we've held the video in place. Then we also need to expand the mask. Okay, so first of all, we're going to go into the flicker comp and we're going to press U on the keyboard. That shows only the keyframes that we have. Okay, so here we need to physically change some of these values. So 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15 just aren't really working. So we need to alter those toggle keyframe values. So we're going to change these values then. We're going to go to 4, and then we're going to go to maybe 7, then we're going to go to 10 on this one, and then we're going to go to maybe 13 on this one, and then we're going to go to 16, and we're going to see how that looks. For me, it still looks pretty good. Let's go back to the main comp. So one thing that you have to check is frame rates of all the compositions. Make sure everything's on 25 frames or 30 or 50 or whatever it is that you're working on. Whatever frame rate that you're working at, make sure that everything is set to exactly the same, otherwise you're going to have a bit of a mismatch going on. So we're going to go through now, and I think it looks a lot more accurate now. Okay, so we've gone back to the main comp and we're looking at this mask here, and so we need to expand this mask quite a lot. Okay, so we've created another mask and we've just expanded the area, and so we're just including more areas to the right of the building where that flicker was quite prevalent, and also further down and a little bit further to the left. So let's see how that looks now. Okay, so we've now got the render preview done, and you can see now looking much better now. Still not perfect, but it's definitely gotten rid of that really annoying light flicker that we had, and it's definitely not there anymore. And for me, it's a pretty smooth transition. I'm pretty happy with that. We could make some small adjustments maybe to the mask again, and maybe we can make some small adjustments to the LRT flicker comp. We could change some of the values on the toggle keyframes to make it match the sequence better. Between 14 and 15 seconds, there's a definite mismatch. So what I can do there, I can go back into the flicker comp, drag that over, and let's make another copy, drag that over. I think that's all it is. I think we just need to make the transition work a bit earlier. I mean, it's all completely trial and error now. This is the part of the time-lapse where it changes, the light changes very, very quickly. So at the beginning, the light isn't changing that quickly. Towards the end, the light's changing much, much quicker. So that's the part we need to look at and try and match it as closely as the original time-lapse. Let's see how that looks now in the main comp. So it's between kind of 13 and 15 seconds where we had a bit of a problem. It needs to be adjusted. Yeah, it's staying light for too long. Yeah, so it's not really matching. So let's go back in again. What we could also do is just make the opacity transitions a little bit longer. Let's see if that works. It's all completely trial and error. Let's see if that works. That might do the trick. Okay, let's go back to the main comp again, give it a save, and let's see how that works. Yeah, it's still staying light for too long. I think we need to drag these values forward a little bit. Go back to the main comp again, and I think that's looking much better now. It's matching the exposure of the original time-lapse much, much more accurately. So let's just scrub through again slower. And it's not perfect, but there's a little bit of flicker on the wall still. But I think we can fix that with the mask. If we select where the mask is, show layer controls again, I think we just need to alter the mask slightly. Yeah, you can see here that the mask is not really covering the building particularly accurately. So we just need to alter the mask slightly, and then we can get rid of that small flicker. We can do that now. Bit of a pain, but has to be done. Masks have to be accurate. And what you can't do is you cannot use the mask feather tool. Okay, that's something that cannot be used with this. So you're gonna have to leave that off. Now that we've finally rendered the preview in the timeline, you can see that's looking much, much better. The kind of transition of that area that we masked out is much, much more accurate, much better. The mask around it is working much better as well. There's a slight flicker in that kind of top right corner. There's a building, the last building to the right, there's a small flicker there. We could look to expand the mask out to that area. Let's just do it now just to see what happens. So we're gonna go up here. That's close to the edge of the outline of the building as possible. I mean, you could go on forever. I mean, we could just end up covering the whole building. So we have to be kind of, careful that we don't edit out the entire original time lapse, because that would be a bit pointless, really. It would be a bit silly, and it wouldn't be a time lapse anymore. So we've got to be realistic about what we can actually do here. We can't just edit the whole building. A slight adjustment to be made between 2 and 4 seconds. Barely notice it, but that building in the top right now, that flicker is completely gone. So that's looking much, much nicer. And the great thing is the mask is so accurate around the buildings that it's not affecting the sky or the mountains, or any background element is really not being affected at all. So that's really, really nice. So it's kind of working. It's really, really smooth transition that's happening there. I think we may need to maybe apply some warp stabilization to the LRT3 composition. Maybe there's a slight jittery, because it was quite windy on the day. There's a little bit of jitter going on at the bottom, so maybe we can apply some warp stabilization there. That I think will help, but apart from that, I don't think we need to do anything. You can see here sort of bottom left, there's a little bit of movement there, so that's kind of ruining it a little bit, but it can be fixed. So just use the warp stabilizer to fix these things. But the transition, really we're looking at the transition between the original composition, LRT3, and the flicker correction composition on top of it. And I think maybe just a very, very slight adjustment between 2 and 4 seconds. We need to change that. So that's, I think all we need to do there, we just need to drag this value down. Let's do that. And let's create a longer opacity fade between the two. Maybe that will work. drag it down a little bit further. Let's give that a go. So really we're only looking sort of between 2 seconds and 4 seconds. Let's see if that's improved. So I think that's looking much more accurate now. A slight adjustment between 2 and 4 seconds, that really helps. And just that whole flicker has completely been removed. I say flickers, but it's like a flashing light. It's physically on the building. It's one of the uplighters was damaged. It wasn't plugged in properly, and it was just like constant flashing. It was just completely ruined the whole time lapse. With the naked eye watching it, you're not going to see that, but when you play it back in a time-lapse sequence, it's just so visible, you can't really ignore it. So had to do something with this to try and fix that original time lapse. And let's just turn off the top layer, LRT3 flicker comp, and then you can see the original comp underneath, and you can see how bad that looked. Very slow rendering these previews because the original file is basically an 8K video time-lapse straight out the Canon R5. So these files are huge. So it's a little bit processor intensive. Physical light is just flashing non-stop and it just looks terrible. It's just, you can't really ignore it. It's basically ruined the whole thing. So the process that I've done here had to be done. Had to do something to try and fix this because we traveled a long way. We waited all day, spent a lot of money. There's no way we're coming away from there without something to show for it. It just looks so bad with that horrible kind of light flashing. And like I said, no software, no flicker correction or flicker free software, LR time-lapse, none of these programs is going to fix that. All they fix are issues with the exposure. This is a physical light within the building that had malfunctioned or needs to be replaced or just isn't working properly. Who knows? I don't know. I don't think it should be like that at all, but it just looks terrible. The flicker correction composition, LRT3 flicker comp, I'm just going to play that through now again. And the previews are really quick now. It's basically gone and there's a really smooth transition, and I think that looks really good. If you were to show anyone that who didn't realize there was a problem, I don't think they would even know that that has been edited or corrected in any way. To me, it looks really smooth. You can't really see any major contrast between the edited area and the sky in the background and other parts of the building. Everything looks like it's reasonably in sync. The only major issue is a slight wobble at the beginning. You can see the building, but that can be fixed with warp stabilizer. I'm pretty confident with that. And if it alters the composition, then we can just alter the mask and that's it, finished, done. And I would be happy to use that. For me, that's a finished product. So there we are. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this has been of some value. Like I said, really use it as a guide to how to edit your own problems that you have with your time lapses. So I'm not trying to show you how to edit your time lapse, I'm just giving you an idea of how you could potentially fix problems within your time lapse when it comes to irregular lighting or flickering or lighting issues that you had. This is a method that can be used to help sort of rectify a time lapse or salvage or help save a time lapse that was kind of ruined. Maybe you spent a long time traveling to a location, you spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time setting things up and getting things right, and then sometimes you just can't see things with the naked eye. You just physically can't see it until the time lapse has been produced, and you look at it and you realize, oh man, that just looks so bad. But so hopefully this will give you an idea of how you can use software like After Effects to help improve and correct and save or salvage some of your time lapses. Thank you very much.